Is the African-American female, excuse me, and we're talking to Miss LWynn from the Tennessee Historical Commission and Fisk University. And of course, Ms. Wynn, during this segment of the show, let's give you an opportunity to talk about the role of African-American women in various categories in the 19th century. Some of the things that you'd like our audience to know that apply specifically to the African-American female. Excuse me.
Okay, one of the things that I would like to point out before we move to the 19th century is that in the colonial period or in the Republican period, you know, when those 55 white men sat down to hammer out a document which would govern this country, very few people realized that the African-American female went from 3/5 of a person in 1787 to 0 in 1870, and 1870 being significant for the ratification of the 15th Amendment, which gave black males the right to vote. So she basically went from being the 3/5 to 0.
She had some influence before the end of the war.
And it was null and void in terms of her voice being heard in representation. You know, if they had really put that old saying, no representation without taxation, or no taxation without representation in the practice, the African-American female, you know, she had the wherewithal to actually put that into practice, could have wielded a whole lot of influence during that time period. But, you know, as we move into that 19th century, black females continue to be proactive. You can look at a woman like Ida B. Wells, who has a Tennessee connection. Ida B. Wells was born a slave in Mississippi after the death of her parents due to the yellow fever epidemic, and 2 of her siblings. She is, at the age of 16, assumed responsibility for her family. Subsequently, she moved to Tennessee to be with the aunt with 2 of her siblings, and to also find a better teaching job. And while in Memphis, she became a journalist. And that was going to be one area, because Ida B. Wells is such a complex woman. But she became a journalist. But what was going to really start her movement, protest movement, you might say, was a train ride to Woodstock, where she had purchased a first-class ticket and was given second-class accommodations. And, you know, if you know anything about Ida B. Wells, you know that she was a woman that was not going to stand for that kind of thing. So she protested vehemently, ended up being literally thrown off the train, and she decided to file suit against the railroad company there. It's interesting to note that she did win that case at the lower court level, but subsequently lost it at the Tennessee Supreme Court level. And, you know, that was to be the beginning of her protest movement. What really catapulted her into national prominence or a national position of leadership was what they call the lynching at the curve in Memphis, when 3 friends of hers were carried down to an alley and literally shot. And I use the word lynching. Sometimes people think lynching means hanging, but it can also, lynching just really means murder, not necessarily by the rope, but by any other means.
Burning or whatever that were used during the period.
That would use during the period. And because of that, one of her very good friends, Thomas Moss, it caused her to look into the atrocities of lynching. And she wrote some very scathing articles in the newspaper, and was forced, well, she was out of town, and you might say a lynch mob was going to come after her. I think one of the threats was that they were going to hang her up by her neck on a lamppost if she ever came back into the South. But that started her anti-lynching campaign, and she became known as the Crusader for Justice. You know, another contemporary of hers would be Mary Church Terrell, who also has a Tennessee connection. Mary Church was born here in Tennessee. Her father, Robert Church Sr., was, is reported to be one of the first black millionaires in the South. Mary Church was a very well-educated woman. Her father sent her to Oberlin to study. Both Mary Church and Ida B. Wells also participated in the women's suffrage movement. That movement, has approximately 3 waves to it. The first being 1848 in Seneca Falls, where Sojourner Truth also participated. And although this is, we're talking about the African-American female, but Frederick Douglass was also there. He was in support of women having the right to vote. You look at a person like Sojourner Truth, she's primarily known for that speech, Aren't I a Woman? Where she poses that question. So she fits very well into, you might say, the 20th century, her 20th century persona, because she was very active also in the women's movement, but she was also very active in what you would call a civil rights movement. At any rate, Ida B. Wells eventually comes, well, she goes to England, where she persuades people there to also take up the cause of lynching of blacks in America. So she was until the day she died almost, in 1931, she was very proactive. She and Mary Church were also one of the founders of the NAACP. And I think it was very interesting when you look at the formation of that civil rights organization here in Tennessee, that the first chapter would be formed in Memphis around 1917, 1918, that it would be formed in Memphis, since both of them were from Memphis and had a role in its formation.
They played a very, very significant role in the formation.
They played a very significant role in the formation of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Other 19th century persons, women, they also, you had, the women's movement coming about. I mentioned the National Association for Colored Women. Well, Mary Church Terrell was one of its presidents. That organization came about in 1895. Not only was that to garner, the vote for women, but again, they looked at social, economic, and political uplift of the African-American, not only the African-American female, but the African-American population.
Very good. Let us break for this second commercial break, and we'll be back.